Hello, it's April 11th and this is the New Arab Weekly podcast from the New Arab in London. Each week we look at the biggest stories from the week and ask what happened and what does it all mean. Joining us to unpack the last 7 days in the Middle East, we have analysis editor Charlie Hoyle.
Hello.
And senior journalist and editor Nadda Osman.
Hi.
Plenty to do, plenty to say, let's get going.
Israel and Hezbollah have been trading fire across the border since the day after Hamas's surprise operation on the 7th of October. In recent months and weeks, however, Israel's strikes have grown both in their aggression and frequency, raising fears that an escalation is imminent.
هذه المقاومة في لبنان لا تخشى حربا.
So that was Hassan Nasrallah who spoke on the 5th of April, saying, "The resistance in Lebanon does not fear war, nor does it dread it." He went on to say that the Lebanese group was fully prepared for a war with Israel. The context of this comes as Israel's strikes on Lebanon have escalated in the past week. This Monday, a member of Hezbollah's elite Radwan unit, Ali Ahmed Hassan, was assassinated by Israel. This follows on from a series of high-profile assassinations of Hezbollah commanders. On March 25th, Ali Naim, a deputy commander in Hezbollah, was killed in south of Lebanon, while Wissam al-Tawil, another Radwan commander, was killed. This, in turn, follows on from the assassination of Salah al-Aruri, a deputy Hamas commander, in Beirut on January the 2nd, and also a suspected Israeli airstrike on the 1st of April, which targeted the Iranian consulate in Damascus. To give an overview of the situation between Israel and Hezbollah since October the 7th, around 300 people have been killed in Lebanon, at least 66 civilians, while 18 Israelis have been killed, including 12 soldiers. The humanitarian impact on civilians in both countries has been huge. Tens of thousands of Lebanese civilians have been displaced in the south, while hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been displaced in the north. The farm economy has been hit particularly hard in southern Lebanon, having a huge economic impact on civilian life. In parallel to an escalation in violence, particularly on the Israeli side, there's also been a war of words between Israel and Hezbollah. Adding on from Nasrallah's statement on its preparations for war, the Israeli leadership has also said that it's preparing to transition from a defensive position to an offensive position.
I think we could say that support for Palestine and support for the people of Gaza is pretty high in Lebanon. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Does that inherently then also mean that there's so much support in Lebanon that they're also prepared to go to war with Israel? Because those are not the same thing.
No, of course not. And I think despite the widespread support for Palestinians in Lebanon, especially given the scale of Israel's war in Gaza, I think no one in Lebanon really wants to see a war. I think the memories of 2006 are still very fresh for most people.
Of course.
That was a 34-day conflict which killed thousands of Lebanese civilians, displaced tens of thousands more, effectively devastated the south of the country. And no one wants to return to that kind of situation, especially given Lebanon's economic crisis. War is in no one's interest in this sense.
Lebanon certainly cannot afford it at all.
No, of course not.
And in terms of Hassan Nasrallah, we've seen that since the start of the war, he's been giving very regular speeches. So do you think that Hezbollah actually want war, or is all of this just talk?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of rhetoric to it on both the Israeli side and on the Hezbollah side. And we have to keep in mind that Yoav Gallant, the deputy or rather the defense minister of Israel, last summer threatened, and it's not the first time he said this, to send Lebanon back to the Stone Age.
Yeah.
And only recently he said that he's happy to copy-paste the Gaza war onto Lebanon. Yeah. So there's a ramping up of rhetoric on both sides. And of course Hezbollah has to respond, and it has responded with force to these assassinations. But it's actually been very restrained so far in its response.
It's never been like quite what people expect. I mean, since like the very beginning of this conflict, everyone has been almost like, I think in some cases almost to like an inappropriate degree, being like, when's it going to spread, when it's going to be a regional conflict? Yeah. And that's never happened. No. And Hassan Nasrallah has like just repeatedly teased everybody.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think people have been maybe overhyping the the possibility of a regional war. I mean,
which would be devastating.
It would
as well.
be devastating.
I mean, beyond devastating.
It would be devastating. I don't think
for everybody,
and I don't think any of the actors involved want that. I think Israel can't win, Hezbollah can't win. Certainly, civilians don't win.
No.
But I think Hezbollah has, and Iran actually, have shown a lot of restraint, especially given the high-level assassinations by Israel in Lebanon, in Syria.
With impunity, they've happened.
With impunity. And it's that, in a way, Israel is seemingly trying to goad Hezbollah and Iran into actions that might make a regional war inevitable. And I think so far there has been a lot of restraint. I think Hezbollah has to respond rhetorically, but it's a rational actor, and I don't think it wants to lose its privileged position. I don't think Iran necessarily wants to risk the asset that Hezbollah represents for it. And in the end, an Israeli ground invasion looks unlikely, but certainly like an escalation in airstrikes could be something that it focuses on in the south.
Yeah,
Israel basically wants to secure its northern border. It wants to return for civilians to their homes, but it also wants Hezbollah to move its forces,
away.
Yeah, well, withdraw to the Litani River.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how far the southern border of Lebanon goes for Israel. I mean, does that also include southern Beirut?
Yeah.
Which, is a fair distance from the border, and also, a place where they have a lot of support.
Yeah.
In the in the southern district of Beirut.
No,
so
definitely.
if we see an escalation of it, and it's also a heavily dense civilian area.
Yeah. But there is a deterrence aspect, and Hezbollah has, if you like, grown stronger since the 2006 conflict, and that represents.
I mean, they're incredibly well armed,
well organized, well drilled.
Yeah.
That represents a huge, deterrent to an Israeli invasion, a ground invasion. They still have air superiority, but equally, Israel has the deterrent of what it's doing in Gaza and what it could do to Lebanon again. So I think it's rhetorical, but it's, if any actor is looking to escalate, it's Israel at this stage.
Yeah. Have you ever been to the Hezbollah Museum in Lebanon?
No, I haven't.
No. If you're in the area, it's well worth it.
We covered this. Is this the newest one?
No, it's been around. The one I've been to a few times has been around for a while, but it's a lovely day out.
Yeah. Well, next time. Yeah.
Israel killed 4 of Hamas political bureau chief Haniyeh's sons this week, and 4 of his grandchildren as well. They were aged 10, 8, 4. The Israeli airstrikes targeted them while they were driving in a car along the Shatit camp, going to visit friends and family for Eid. There was footage of the exact moment that Ismail Haniyeh received the news. He was in Qatar visiting wounded Palestinians in a hospital when he received the news. So when he receives the news, he has a very kind of blank expression on his face, where he says, "May God have mercy on them," and he continues to repeat that phrase. So there's been a lot of conversation of people saying that it's a very chilling response. It shows that he has no emotion. He's very casual and nonchalant.
Psychotic. I saw it.
Psychotic, yeah. People have been calling him psychotic and kind of saying he has no emotions and no feelings whatsoever. But there's a certain nuance that people are missing, I feel, here.
What would be the nuance?
So the fact that we're constantly hearing time and time again videos of Palestinians who have just had family members killed, saying that they're happy that their kind of children or their relatives have been martyred, and that kind of stems from the concept of martyrdom in Islam. So there's certain groups of people who are considered martyrs in Islam, and those are, for example, people who die in fires or through drowning, even women in childbirth, those who die protecting their property or defending their family or religion. Now, these people are considered to have special privileges from God. Muslims believe that they have their sins forgiven, and they have a place in paradise. They also are given a crown of dignity on their head in the hereafter. So for Palestinians, this also kind of has links to the concept of sumud, which means resilience, and this is something that's kind of gained prominence since the Nakba of 1948, where Palestinians have, shown resilience and resistance in not giving up hope in the face of occupation. So that kind of explains slightly his unemotional expression.
We heard Charlie was just talking about sort of the targeted assassinations of Hezbollah commanders in Lebanon. Were Haniyeh's children and grandchildren targeted by Israel, or were they killed in bombings? Do we know?
No, I think we know that it was a calculated assassination. So it's a personal attack. I think the IDF released a statement saying in one report that I saw that they were on the way to carrying out an attack, which we know is ludicrous.
Yeah.
But also they were militants, and I think all subsequent reports, say that basically they're on the way to a family Eid celebration at the time. Yeah. So I think it was a personal, calculated attack on the Hamas political leadership.
I think it's also important to note that the Israeli military released a statement after they were killed saying that they eliminated 3 Hamas military wing operatives in the central Gaza Strip, and that they were the sons of Haniyeh, but they failed to mention the killing of his grandchildren, which is quite interesting, I find.
It's maybe just once again, how old were the grandchildren? They
were 10, 4 and 8, and the age of the last grandchild is not known yet.
Other things, it's relentlessly busy in Gaza. They're pulling out as well. What will happen there?
Yes, so we're now into the 7th month on the war of Gaza. Israel announced this week that it withdrew its 98th Division from South Gaza, leaving only 2 brigades behind. Now, this kind of announcement has left people very confused. People are questioning, does this mean it's the end of the conflict? But Israel has repeatedly said that it doesn't mean that. The defense minister has said that it's part of Israel's wider plan to continue the army's operation into Rafah. Now, there are around 1.4 million Palestinians now in Rafah who have been forcibly displaced from other parts of Gaza. And the White House has also said that the pullout of troops is largely for them to rest and refit. Still, the reasons are fairly unclear. We don't know what the reason is, but the National Security Minister Ben Gvir has warned that if Netanyahu does end the war without an expansive assault on Rafah, then he won't have the mandate to serve as Prime Minister. So there's been quite a lot of discourse around this. It's still unclear, is this a broader plan to keep Israeli forces fighting at a kind of lower intensity but prolonging the war? We're not sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see sort of what they do. I mean, I think it does ties us back into, Charlie, your story that I think there is a redistribution of troops happening where they're just, now they're dealing with a much smaller area of land in Gaza, that they can redeploy troops to the north if anything happens there.
Yeah.
It's all obviously a bit confusing. I'd say one thing that hasn't been confusing at all, I mean, is what people have been finding as Israel has withdrawn. Residents of Khan Younis have been going back. I mean, there was one, this was on Sunday, around 90 bodies had been recovered in Khan Younis after Israeli forces withdrew. I mean, the destruction, the pictures of destruction coming are unbelievable. They are
horrendous.
Horrendous. It's not. Yeah, I mean, it's beyond just.
And I think
the normal sort of bombed out buildings. They are flat landscapes.
It's annihilation. Annihilation. I think Khan Younis would draw his interest in a sense that there's always seems to be a new atrocity that overshadows the previous atrocity. And in this case, the killing of 7 aid workers completely overshadowed the massacres or reported massacres at Al-Shifa Hospital. So as the press and international community and Palestinian journalists in Gaza are still catching up with one massacre, there's another atrocity, and of course the withdrawal and the return of Palestinians to Khan Younis leads to more discoveries, and it's sort of a never-ending litany of atrocities. But I think the withdrawal also has led many in Lebanon to speculate about Israel's intentions in terms of a rebalancing of forces. But it's all tied into with ceasefire negotiations and truce talks. And I think another point to mention about the assassination of Haniyeh's sons and grandchildren, it seems to be a deliberate plot to sabotage truce talks and sabotage hostage negotiations, because Israel has no interest whatsoever in a temporary ceasefire.
No.
That's interesting that you say that, because Haniyeh, in an interview with Al Jazeera, he maintained that it won't push Hamas to change their position when it comes to truce negotiations. And he also said that his sons' lives weren't any more valuable than the 33,000 other Palestinians killed since 7th of October. So he says it definitely won't, put an end to kind of Hamas's involvement in truce talks.
That's interesting.
We've also seen, in terms of Khan Younis, we've seen 55% of buildings either destroyed or damaged now, especially around Eid al-Fitr. A lot of Palestinians were going back to their homes since the pullout, and just going back to complete destruction, entire neighborhoods wiped out, leveled. It's been it's quite shocking, really.
There was one resident of Khan Younis, who I quote here on the New Arab website, and she says, "We don't have a city anymore, only rubble. There is absolutely nothing left. I could not stop myself crying as I walked through the streets." Continuing, "All the streets have been bulldozed, and the smell, I watched people digging and bringing out the bodies." I think the devastation left in the wake of Israel's deployment and occupation there is obviously appalling. Obviously, every death is a tragedy. Palestine also lost another notable this week. Nadda.
Yeah, so this week we saw 62-year-old Palestinian intellectual Walid Daqqa die of terminal cancer while in Israeli custody. Now, he's a very prominent Palestinian figure. He was sentenced to 37 years in prison in 1986 for an alleged role in killing an Israeli soldier. He was due to be released in 2023, but an Israeli court kept extending his detention to 2025, accusing him of various things, including smuggling in a mobile phone. His family and human rights activists have been campaigning for his release for years and campaigning for him to get treatment. He suffered from bone marrow cancer, but they failed repeatedly to get him any help, with Israel saying that his illness was not serious enough.
Bone marrow cancer?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a tragic case, and it highlights a much wider problem of the treatment of Palestinian prisoners, which has long been an issue, which numerous human rights organisations have highlighted.
Yeah, we've seen an uptick in arrests as well since October the 7th. Around 7,350 Palestinians arrested in the occupied West Bank in that time frame, which is shocking, obviously, because all eyes are rightly on Gaza at the moment, but the West Bank is completely exploding in terms of arrests, and not only that, but the treatment of prisoners.
Yeah, that's got. I mean, in prisons, apparently it's got. They are being punished for what's happening on the outside, quite severely.
Yeah, and I think Israeli ministers have also announced the construction of new prisons to hold more Palestinian prisoners. They've been punished, Palestinians that have been arrested and taken from Gaza to Israel. They've suffered torture. I think that's maybe an overlooked issue, given the mass killing in Gaza.
Yeah.
And I just think it's worth noting as well that the figure that I just said does not include thousands of adults and children in Gaza who have been detained and tortured and interrogated. Israel is also kind of constructing makeshift prisons across Gaza. Some of the testimonies that have come out have been absolutely shocking. Prisoners being denied family visits, electricity, food, water, healthcare. There's also been testimonies of electric shocks, using army dogs to bite and scratch prisoners, and being forbidden from praying as well.
Yeah, it's all reminiscent of some of the worst things from history.
Yeah.
But no, wasn't there also reports that Walid Daqqa's body was withheld by Israeli forces?
That's correct. Ever since he was killed, his family have been calling on Israeli authorities to release his body. They haven't yet. They said that they're going to be holding onto it. And this is part of a long history of Israel holding on to Palestinian bodies. Several right groups have said that they're taken to mass graves and also kept in morgues, which have sub-freezing temperatures. His family constructed a kind of funeral tent since they weren't able to bury the body, which was also taken down by Israeli forces, and 5 people were arrested. So they're not even able to properly mourn or grieve. And this is something that happens to Palestinians all the time. It's not something that has just come into place since October 7th.
A good article, if you want to read more on this, from our West Bank correspondent, Qassem Muadi, Skeletons in the Closet, Israel's macabre policy of keeping dead Palestinian bodies from their families. On Monday, April 8th, the Gulf nation of Bahrain announced that 1,584 prisoners were to be released and pardoned as part of an amnesty. Some of those released were serving life sentences, while others had been jailed for their part in the 2011 protests. News of the release led to celebrations on the streets. So first thing to say that this was a surprise. It was not anticipated by really anybody. To put it lightly, Bahrain is not known for its humanitarian efforts when it comes to prisoners. They're much more of the sort of solitary confinement, torture side of things, and less of the pardoning and release sort of things. Some of the prisoners were released. Some were released conditionally. It's worth pointing out, on using something called quote-unquote alternative sentences. This essentially means that prisoners who have served half their time inside can serve the rest outside, doing some community service, rehabilitation courses, and being electronically surveilled. About 65% of those released were convicted on charges that were related to the 2011 protest movement, which was all part of the bigger, wider Arab Spring. This is the biggest royal pardon seen in Bahrain since 2011. It was ordered by King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, and it coincided with Eid and also the silver jubilee of him taking power. Bahrain as a nation, and this all tied in with 2011, has sort of kept a lid on Shia opposition and Shia dissent in the country since the failed uprisings of 2011. During that time, Saudi Arabia were sent in to Bahrain in order to help crush dissent and restore order, or what they see as order.
And Hugo, who has been released in this amnesty?
Some notable people. Najib Fatil is one person who's been released, a leading figure in the Bahrain Society for Human Rights. He was involved in the 2011 demonstrations heavily. He was actually jailed in 2013. He was allegedly tortured for several days. He needed hospital treatment twice. Others released: Sheikh Hassan Issa, a prominent Shia cleric, former member of parliament for a now banned Islamist movement. The party El Wafaq, they were once one of the most powerful opposition groups in the country. He was jailed in 2017, in March, sentenced to 10 years. Others released: Mahmoud al-Jaziri is a journalist for what was described as the last independent newspaper in Bahrain. It's called Al-Wasat. It's closed now, unsurprisingly. He was arrested in 2015, end of 2015, December, on charges of belonging to a terrorist group, and was handed a 15-year jail sentence. He was also stripped of his citizenship. He was beaten and subject to other sort of abuses while in prison. That did not stop him reporting. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he managed to get out recordings about how essentially they weren't observing social distancing for the prisoners inside prisons.
Wow.
For that, he was then put in solitary confinement for at least 4 days, maybe longer.
So Mariam al-Khawaja, who's a Bahraini human rights campaigner and the daughter of Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja, says that this is not necessarily, it's welcome news, it's good news, but she's saying that there is no guarantee that these people won't be rearrested again. Last year, she was prevented from boarding a British Airways flight to Bahrain. So, you know, is there a risk that these people can be imprisoned again? And do you think this is just similar to kind of Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia and an effort to polish his image by releasing these prisoners?
Yeah. So on the last point, I think this is definitely like an image. And I mean, you ask, why? Why do they need to do this? I mean, most people didn't know these people were in prison anyway, outside of Bahrain. So why bother do it? Certainly to improve global image. It's also, I think, a money thing. Doing this, could help increase direct foreign investment to the country. Tourism as well. We've seen it. Exactly. You're right. It's the same with Saudi Arabia. Essentially try and look normal, and people might want to go on holiday there. But if you're jailing people who don't like the government, that's not quote unquote normal behaviour. So people are less likely to go on holiday there. It is on the subject of Saudi Arabia. It is likely that this was at least approved by Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince of Bahrain was in Saudi Arabia for an iftar meal with the Pakistani Prime Minister, I think it was. So I mean, it's likely that this idea came up and was approved by Saudi Arabia. There's also the potential that Saudi Arabia told them to do this and said, "Hey, why don't we free these people?" I mean, it's not unreasonable.
No, and also, Bahrain usually takes its foreign policy and domestic policy cues from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I think also on the point of Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja, it's worth noting, there are still over 600 political prisoners are still in prison in Bahrain. So this is great. Over 1,500 released, but over 600 still there. Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja is one of them. He is a Bahraini political activist. He's been in jail since June of 2011 on a life sentence. He's the former president and co-founder of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, which I'm pretty sure is based in the UK now. And he is, there's serious concerns about his life. There's been allegations that he has been tortured in prison and also suffered from sexual assault in prison. So another person who hasn't also been released, Abdul Jali Abdullah Al-Singais, is a Bahraini engineer, blogger, another human rights activist. Arrested again 2011 during the uprisings. He, on April 3rd of this year, so just last week, he passed the 1,000-day mark of a liquid-only hunger strike. Another notable name who wasn't released was Hassan Mashema, opposition leader in Bahrain, Secretary General of the Haq movement, which was an important opposition party in Bahrain. He was actually during 2011, he was actually in the country in the UK for treatment for lung cancer. And when the protest started, he was returning to Bahrain to take part and then was arrested actually in Lebanon. Likely at the request of the Bahraini government.
And Hugo, what's been the reaction so far to these prison releases?
Limited, really. I mean, Amnesty said it was a welcome step, but they shouldn't have been in prison in the first place. The Bahrain Institute for Human Rights, whose founder and leader is still in prison, said that it came as a complete shock that there had been no prior indication, and that this is the most important release program since 2011, going on to say the release is bittersweet as there are still 600 political prisoners behind bars and on death row. The US Embassy in Bahrain welcomed the move and expressed the hope that all those being released will be reunited with their families. Part of all of this, I think, is to do with the normalization, sort of tangentially normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran. A lot of these people are part of a Shia uprising that was in 2011 that was supported by Iran. It's worth saying that the ruling party in Bahrain is a Sunni, same as Saudi Arabia. I think now with the normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the risk of another uprising, a Shia uprising that could be supported by Iran, is very low. Iran are not looking to sort of increase their proxies in that sort of manner across the region, especially in the Gulf. That could be one of the reasons why we saw this release. Although, as we say, it's good, but not enough.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Before we go, a few other stories from the week. There's this piece, April 6th. Kais Saied announces presidential re-election bid to, quote, save Tunisia from foreign forces. Tunisia's authoritarian incumbent president announced on Saturday he was run for a second term. This could be, do we think, considering we've spoken about the Arab Spring today, it started in Tunisia back in 2000, I think it was actually 2010.
Yeah, with the death of Bouazizi.
Yes. Could this be another flashpoint, do we think, for the country, or is he actually in complete control?
I doubt it would be a flashpoint. Unfortunately, I think Kais Saied has hollowed out state institutions, has control over the judiciary, has muzzled the press, has imprisoned opposition party members, including those who tried to herald in a new era in Tunisia following the Arab Spring. Mm-hmm. So I think he's fully created a authoritarian state in Tunisia.
Yep, it's sad to see. Another story, this is from today. Israel says progress made in normalization talks with Indonesia, world's largest Muslim country. Israel has made progress in normalizing ties with Indonesia, and an Israeli official speaking on the condition of anonymity said on Thursday. This is tied up with Indonesian efforts to join the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Is this a way for Israel sort of to bully its way to relations with Indonesia?
I mean, I think they'll try, but Indonesia won't agree. I think it will be absolutely catastrophic if they do, especially considering the pro-Palestine support that we've seen in recent months. We've seen thousands of people go out to protest for Gaza, for Palestinians. We've also seen Indonesian officials last month go on official visits and maintained that they will not change their stance on Palestine. So I don't think we're going to be seeing that anytime soon.
No.
And I would just add that I think it's very unlikely any new country is going to normalize with Israel, given events in Gaza.
Yeah, I think so. Final story, April 8th, Saudi Arabia's NEOM and the line to be massively scaled down. This is the ambitious $500 billion NEOM mega project. It's part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 plan. It's going to be drastically scaled down. The line, the revolutionary linear city, is being scaled down from 170 kilometres to just 2.4 kilometres. And the population, it was planned to host 1.5 million people by 2030, is now being downsized to just 300,000. Is this Saudi Arabia's dreams meeting with reality? I mean, it was crazy. Like it was
insane. I think when we all saw the kind of projections for the line and the NEOM project and the kind of beautifully rendered images by Western consultants, I think a lot of people question whether this could actually happen.
Yeah,
and maybe now we're seeing that it can't happen. Yeah.
Some good pieces on the New Arabs website this week. I picked one out. This is from the Opinions desk. Can Israel's war on Gaza trigger a Palestinian spring in the Arab world? By Sanya Mahou. Good opinion piece this. Talking about both the protests in the Moroccan city of Tangier and also the protests seen in the Jordanian capital of Amman against Israel's aggression in Gaza. Obviously, both those countries have their own particular relationship with Israel. Charlie, you have a piece for us?
Yes, this week I'm choosing a piece from the Analysis Desk by Mark Owen Jones. It's called In Gaza, We Are Watching the World's First AI-Assisted Genocide. Essentially, this article kind of follows on from excellent reporting in Plus 972 magazine last week, looking at the use of AI-assisted targeting systems that Israel has been using in the Gaza war, which in part have accounted for the huge casualty rate amongst Palestinian civilians. It's effectively algorithmic murder and a way of outsourcing decision-making on who lives and who dies in Gaza to machine learning. And this piece unpacks that and also looks at the history of Israel's use of AI in the Gaza Strip and opens an interesting debate about the morality of using AI in conflicts.
Excellent. Nadda.
Yes, my pick is from the features section. It's called Divide and Rule. Apartheid Israel hunts down Gazan workers stranded in West Bank for lacking work permits. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really important to keep an eye on the West Bank. It covers the arrest of Palestinians, even though they did have Israeli-issued work permits before October 7th. Yet Israel has been cracking down on them, and we all know about the prison conditions at the moment in the West Bank and Israel.
All those stories well worth a read. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the New Arab Weekly. This week we were joined by analysis editor Charlie Hoyle and senior journalist and editor Nadda Osman. We'll be back next Friday and every Friday after that. Our other podcast, The New Arab Voice, a new episode is out now. This week I was looking at the recent Turkish elections, which did not go to plan for President Erdogan. You can subscribe to The New Arab Voice and this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts, and be notified when a new episode drops. Until then, if you have a question for us or any stories that you would like us to cover, drop us an email, podcast@newarab.com. That's podcast@newarab.com, or find us on social media at TNA Podcasts for all the latest news. You can subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and you can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.